In what seems like a rejected Tim Burton screenplay, House Speaker Mike Johnson and his daughter starred in an unsettling spectacle of a purity ball. Imagine fathers and daughters, adorned in ball gowns straight out of a wedding wardrobe, pledging allegiance to abstinence-like characters from a ghostly romantic comedy. This new segment left even the reporter baffled as he exclaimed, "This looks like a wedding." No, it wasn't a wedding. It was a macabre dance of purity pledges and eerie laughter, as if the Addams family decided to add choreographed chastity to their repertoire. Forget politics, we've entered the Twilight Ballroom zone instead. This story is from ABC News by Will Staken. It was published on December 20th, 2023. Scott, go ahead. I know you've got a lot to say about it.
Well, my first thought was that, I guess it's not all that surprising, right? Mike Johnson, he does this kind of thing. But I think, that's kind of like a false headline here. It doesn't find whatever, Mike Johnson can do whatever he wants. Having him do this kind of thing is not the weird part, which leads to my second thought, which was, it's like, this is really just a creepy kind of thing. Girls are pledging abstinence to their fathers. Why to their fathers? And where are the sons and all? Where's everybody else in all of this? It just reeks of biblical misogyny and plain and simple. It's just it's almost like a banner advertising. Here's what you find. Our girls have to report to their fathers, and I don't know. It just seemed weird. A cherry on that idea, in the article, they quoted Linda K. Klein. She's the author of a book called Pure, Inside the Evangelical Movement That Shamed a Generation of Young Women and How I Broke Free. Okay, so think of that tale, how she broke free. Here's the quote. There's this way in which purity culture attempts to create this eternal girlhood among girls. You never really grow up. You never really have headship over your own life. You ultimately are there to be guided by and to support and to champion and to be led by somebody greater than you, a man. I mean, I rest my case. I'm glad that she was able to bust out of that paradigm. But I mean, come on, you couldn't get more black and white than that. And the problem, though, is that these pledges don't work, right? There's tons and tons of research on this that all say that these purity promises, these purity dances, these rings that they wear, these pledges that they sign, it just doesn't work. I mean, there was
I think we all know the best way to get a teenager to do something is to tell them that they can't, right?
Exactly. There was the Guttmacher Institute released a report in 2008 that found that after 5 years into their research, more than half of both pledgers and non-pledgers had engaged in sexual activity. Pledgers, however, were less likely to use contraceptives or to use them consistently. For example, 34% of the non-pledgers who had sex said they had always used condoms over the past year, compared to 24% of pledgers. And this point I thought was interesting. In addition, 82% of the women that had taken the pledge of abstinence denied that they ever took the pledge. And so not only are they ineffective, and not only are they causing harm, but they're setting up this denial system. It's just really weird. And it's dangerous too. I mean, it's increasing the chance of unwanted pregnancy. It's increasing the chance of unwanted sexually transmitted infections. And it's just dangerous all around. And the thing is, it's not that abstinence only doesn't work. Okay. If you don't have sex, you're going to be less likely to have an unwanted pregnancy. You're going to be less likely to pass on a sexually transmitted infection. The problem is that abstinence-only education does not lead to abstinence. That's the problem. And so it's a matter of education and approach. And so if we cut back on the education that's helpful, and dump our energy into these efforts that are ineffective and harmful, that's just not that's not a recipe for success there. Aaron, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, like, what's your real goal here? Is your goal really to decrease the likelihood that your teenager is going to have sex? Is your goal to decrease the spread of STIs? Is your goal to avoid abortions? Well, then you're going about it all wrong. This is not avoiding talking about it is not help the problem. In the article, they quote Mike Johnson's wife, Kelly Johnson, who's a Christian counselor, which is code for unlicensed counselor. She says, we don't talk to her, their daughter, about contraception. Sex before marriage is simply out of the question. Well, that's just putting your head in the sand, because people
proudly putting your head in the sand.
Mm-hmm. The idea that talking about something makes it more likely for someone to engage in that behavior is it's a false idea. If it was true, then we wouldn't talk about gun safety. We wouldn't talk about drug and alcohol abuse and how to avoid it. If you want people to avoid behavior, then you actually need to talk about it. You need to talk about ways of having safe sex, how to prevent pregnancy, how to prevent STIs, the real truth about what's going on, so that people can make informed decisions. When people can't make informed decisions, then you're not going to decrease the behavior that you think you're going to decrease. Jonathan?
I find this whole thing a little bit creepy. Just a little
bit?
Just a little bit creepy.
And Jonathan's very generous tonight.
It's all the creepy. It's all the creepy.
I'm failing miserably. This is definitely, like you all said in describing it, but to me, it looks like this is a father conditioning a 13-year-old to not just not have sex, but to obey him, right? Until such point as he sells her to her husband, who she can then obey her husband. Mm-hmm. This makes me sick. This is just sickening. And to make such a big production of it is like telling her that you're in this big white ball gown because you're pure and your spirit is pure and blah, 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 bullshit. And I get to the point where I say, this is so creepy. And it just looks like a bunch of lecherous old men, and I'm kind of like, ew, just ew, let these girls alone, man. Let them have their childhood, for Christ's sake. Let them be a preteen. Let them be, I don't know, fans of their favorite rock star. Don't hold them back, because all that emotional repression, by the time they get to be my age, becomes a very expensive therapy session. Or series of therapy sessions to try and deal with. These poor kids are going to wake up when they're in their 20s, 30s, or 40s and say, oh my God, I've just lost my entire life that I could have had. And a lot of us understand that, and understand how that goes. And that is just criminal. That is criminal to do that to a child. And but they get away with it because it's all in the name of religion and parental rights. Yep. But parents should at least be aware of the damage they're doing to these girls. And it may not look like it. They may look like they're happy preteens and they're just having a great time going to this ball and that sort of thing. But the symbolism will strike home, and eventually they're going to say, "Hey, wait a minute! I'm a human being too. Why the hell am I being bought and sold like some piece of meat?" And that, I think, is where the society is going to end up paying for this, because they're going to need a lot of coaching and a lot of therapy to get over this, so they can live a healthy life and free of mental illness. Anyway, I'm just that's what it terrifies me, what's happening to these poor kids. But Kelly, how about you?
Yeah, you're right. The fact I have a lot of problems with the story, and I might be saying some things that people don't agree with, and just like everybody else, the story itself didn't surprise me at all. The fact that Johnson was involved in something like this, I don't even understand why that fact is even newsworthy. When he was elected speaker, we all knew who he was. He was a far-right Christian nationalist with what I would call some pretty backwards religious ideals that were detrimental to freedom. So adding the fact that he also believes in purity culture is that going to make that any worse? So I read this and I say, big deal. There's a lot worse about this guy's worldview than this. I mean, this is a guy that wants his country to become a neo-fascist theocracy where women don't even have the right to medical decisions over their own bodies, and we're supposed to be surprised that he brought his daughter to a purity ball. I just, like I say, I don't understand why the story itself is newsworthy, although I agree with what everybody has been saying about purity balls and the whole idea behind it. And while the whole idea doesn't speak to me personally on that kind of level, because I'm a male, it does make you wonder how he views a woman's role in society. And I'll tell you, to me, it doesn't look very good. And I think everybody on the panel would agree on me about this. It's this patriarchal, subservient ideology that I'm sure that the majority of American women don't agree with. And we've come so far to get rid of this mentality in my lifetime. We still have a way to go, don't get me wrong, but it's obviously we got a long way to go when we see things like this. But I'm hoping that we don't stop moving forward, and I hope it keeps getting better as we go on. And I want to say something. I know there's a lot of people who are thinking, oh, the Democrats need to save this, but you know what? You shouldn't be relying on anyone to save you. Just like you shouldn't be relying on any political party. The only people that are going to save us is us. Scott?
I wanted to build on something that Jonathan was talking about. He said that the parents need to know the harm that they're causing. And I think that there's a fundamental block in that. Okay. I think I'm gonna go out on a limb here, and I'm gonna try to be as charitable as I can, and I'm going to work under the assumption that the parents are at the very least, they at least think that they're doing something positive and good for their kids. Okay, so I'll for the sake of this portion of the discussion, I'll grant them that. But there's roadblocks in there for them to be able to see the harm that they're causing, and in order for them to do that, in order for them to acknowledge that this approach could be harmful, they have to acknowledge that their religious teachings might not be 100% on the nose, and that's something, and that putting that crack in the wall there, that can it can all come tumbling down, and so I think and here we're getting into conjecture, in my opinion, thoughts on things. But I think that there's a strong desire and a strong urge to resist that kind of admission, to resist admitting that they could be causing harm, to resist that what they learn about in their church groups or from their religious leaders, that might not be the best way to go. And so I think, and that's really the hardest step. That's really the hardest part, is just making that one, that shift from complete certainty to, second guessing and maybe just double checking and thinking, maybe I'm not exactly on point here. That's like the biggest step. In math, we have this phrase. Well, it's not really a math phrase, but it sounds mathy. And it says that the difference between 1 and 2 is nowhere near the difference between 0 and 1. And so and what that means is that you could take that first step. That's the difficult part. And so I think that part of the reason that we see all this pushback to this kind of thing is that they're just unable to make that first step. And so I hope that, we talk about how creepy this is and how weird it is and how strange it is and how demeaning to the girls it is. So their fathers owns their virginity? That's just sick on levels that it's difficult to comprehend. And so I think that's the hardest step, though, is that first little step out onto that, little road that we call skepticism. One little thing that I wanted to throw in before I'm done here, interesting side note is that Mike Johnson was actually just recently featured on Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. And not only does he have this odd relationship with his daughter, but he has a weird relationship with his son, too. He and his son are each other's porn sponsors or whatever you want to call it. They're like supposed to be watching out for each other. They use this app where their browser history and their device, the things that they do with their devices, that information is saved and given as a report to the other person. And so he and his son are exchanging that. I mean, I don't know. It just,
he's actually bragged about that in public doing that. Yeah.
I don't get it. I don't know. Aaron, what do you think?
Yeah, Scott, I really like what you said. And that first step is hard to take because they're part of a fascist religion where, what God says goes. And you got to toe the line and be obedient. And when you're part of that mentality, it's really hard to step outside the box. They teach you not to question. They teach you're taught just to obey.
Right.
And when you're forced to obey and be obedient, then it's okay to force others to obey and be obedient and use things like
it's expected, not just okay, it's expected.
Yeah. And so God is right, so they're right. And so they don't have to reflect on their beliefs and what their beliefs mean and how it impacts other people, especially their kids, because they're supposed to, spare the rod or not spare the rod so they don't spoil the child, so to speak. And in this article, Mike Johnson says that he's trying to fight evil, right? And what he sees as evil, I see differently. I see him and what they stand for as evil because they're a bunch of hypocrites. Mm-hmm. They think it's okay to enforce their moral and religious beliefs via legislation, coercion, and force. And I think that is what evil is evil, not whether or not you have premarital sex. Jonathan?
I have that whole thing of the app. I think we covered a story on like that. They actually generally use their pastors as their partner, their purity partner or whatever it is. And that is like scary stuff. But as far as, this just is on so many levels is just wrong. And, and again, people who are caught up in a delusion, it's very hard to break them out of it because you're part of the delusion when you're telling them that. So it's always self-reinforcing. And that's going to be a tough road for them if they ever decide that they need to comport with reality, which they are not doing at the moment. So it's going to be tough. It's going to be real tough to break through to them. And I don't think it's our job to do that. I think it's their job to do that. And as long as we are presenting ourselves with the real world view, the view of the world that comports with reality, eventually, hopefully the cognitive dissonance will override their sense of the need of them to be and their sense of this is my identity into, oh, gee, this is wrong. Maybe I ought to find something else, so we'll see. Kelly?
Yeah. John, or not John, I'm sorry, Scott, you threw out some statistics on your first time around. And I remember you know what it reminded me of when you were talking about how it wasn't very successful, it reminded me of the DARE program too. And how
same kind of thing.
What an utter failure that was.
Yeah.
I think that even failed worse than this one did. But did you say that like 80% or something of women who had been through the program denied that they had been through it? Was it?
In this particular study, 82% of pledgers 82%. Denied having taken a pledge.
And how many men do you think? Does it say? I was thinking probably all of them.
Would deny having taken a pledge.
Yeah.
That was not covered in this study, but
because I know that they've done it with male
that group. It sure
too.
Wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. I know male students have taken purity pledges. Does anybody know who they give them to? Because they can't give them to their mothers, right?
Because that's true. I don't know. I think maybe they're just maybe it's an honor system with the boys. They just have to pledge to themselves or something. I don't know.
I've no idea. It just kind of got me curious. But, if you want to get some really cool ACA merch, going the wrong way there, you can go to tiny.cc/merch ACA or ACA merch and see all kinds of really cool stuff from all the ACA shows. And if you want to see more of the nonprofits, just click up here.